Hi, Johnny Graham here. Today, we're going to talk about resigning well. Or better than that, we're going to talk about resigning effectively. Resigning from a job isn't easy. It's not easy for everyone. Some people find it easy. Some people are pretty callous about it. But it isn't easy for everyone. We form very strong bonds and attachments to our work. We form strong bonds and attachments to people in our jobs. You know, what is a job? It's a combination of relationships. So these relationships are often as complex as the ones in our personal lives, if not more sometimes. You know, we spend more time at work often than we do at home. If I look at my own week last week, I definitely spent a lot more time working than I did at home. It was a busy week. I spent a lot of time with my colleagues, the people I work with, hours upon hours, and those relationships become complex. So when we walk away from a job, it's not a company we're walking away from. The first thing to understand is we're walking away from some relationships. And when we walk away from a relationship, we're ending a relationship. We're ending a relationship with an individual boss. We're ending a relationship with a group of people, many of whom we're never going to really work with or talk to again. And let's get it right, sometimes we make friends at work. Those friendships are tight bonds. So the first thing I think is important to remember is that when you resign from your job, your relationship with your employer at that point in time is irretrievably damaged. It's a little bit like turning around to a partner and saying, I don't want to be with you anymore. Even if you end up back with them, you've said something very, very hurtful. And that very hurtful thing is something that always sits in the back of the mind of the person that you're saying that to. And so what tends to happen is even the very small percentage of people who are daft enough to accept the overture of being begged to stay in one way or another have damaged their position in that company the moment they do it. It's a divorce. It's the end of a relationship. And people react when you dump them in the same way that partners react when we reject them. And no matter how unpleasant your job and the people around you, it's natural to be nervous about resigning. So what I want to start encouraging you to think about right now is preparing in your mind a readiness for what's to come. So the first thing I want you to think about is, what do you want out of this resignation? And with your consultant, it might be me, it might be Mike, it might be another member of the team, write down what you want out of the situation and how you want it to be. Where do you want to be at the end of it? I was working with a candidate the other day, got offered a job, but knew there was the potential of a compromise agreement if she played it right. And we were very clear, that's the goal. I worked with another candidate the other day, they were resigning and they were very clear with what they wanted. They knew, I've got a 3-month notice period, I want it narrowed down to 1, and I want everybody to be happy at the end of the process. Write it down. Write down the minimum and the maximum that you are prepared to accept in what is going to be a very tough potential negotiation. Write down what you are not prepared to accept, what you are not going to allow to happen, and have it actually physically written down. Be ready, be prepared. You know, I'm not naive. Some people, they're really good at resigning. Some people resign once a year. Some people resign once every 10 years. Some people resign once every 20, and that's not an easy thing to do. So remember, next thing to remember, in your mind, you've got to start shifting loyalty and responsibility to your new employers who need you sat at a desk in front of one of their customers selling their service, product or solution as soon as is humanly possible. And no employer is ever going to say to you, no new employer is ever going to say, I need you here yesterday. But every single one of them bloody well does. Because they're not going to want to seem like some overbearing new employer to you. But they need you. And your loyalties now, and the advice I always give people is in your mind, it's a little bit like a dial, a needle dial. Psychologically, it's important to allow that dial to just slowly begin to move to the other side. Your new employers are your employers now, and your old employers are your old employers, even before you've resigned. Your loyalties and your professional loyalties now need to start shifting. Otherwise, you're going to make a mess of it, and you're going to end up potentially damaging your relationship with your new employer. A good activity to do at this stage is write down every reason why you considered looking for a new role and why you want to join your new employer. Write them down. 5 reasons why I was looking for a job, 5 reasons why I want to join this new company. You're going to need it because they're going to mess with your head here, particularly if you're good and particularly if they don't want you to go. They're going to really come at you, and we'll talk about that more now. So what happens when you resign? Well, actually, over the years, and it's not a formal study, but over the thousands and thousands of resignation processes I've seen and been part of, I've noticed that there's quite a significant analogy between what goes through the mind of an employer when a key employee resigns and the stages of grief that you can research by Kubler-Ross. They go through denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. They go through the lot in that period of time over normally about anywhere between a day and 12 weeks. So let's talk about denial. So the first thing is you go in and you hand your resignation in. It's not uncommon for absolutely nothing at all to happen at that point in time. I see this a lot where the candidate will ring me and I'll say, how did your resignation go? And they'll say, well, I've sent my letter and I had a chat with my boss and I gave him the good news and put the letter in front of him. I've not heard anything back from him all day or for 2 days or for 3 days. They'll just bury their heads in the sand. Or you might not get a return call. Hi boss, it's me. Listen, I've got bad news. I need to tell you I'm going to be leaving the business. Can you give me a call as soon as possible? You'll also find there's an email in your inbox and that of HR. And you might not get a return call for a day, 2 days, 3 days. Sometimes they just go into denial phase. They bury their heads in the sand. And they might just pretend nothing is happening at all. So what do you do when they're in denial? Well, the first thing is you take control. It's your situation now, not theirs, and you are in charge, not them. So I think one of the first things to remember is to shift in your own mind. The person that you resign to is no longer your boss. He is no longer, or she is no longer in charge of the situation. You are. You've resigned. You don't work there anymore. We did a great podcast recently. You can find it if you go to the Always Be Hiring podcast on iTunes or any other key podcast platform, where we interviewed a key employment lawyer who said he's never seen an employee get sued for breach of contract during a resignation or notice period in 25 years of practicing employment law. I.e., if you walked out the door tomorrow and said, to hell with you, I'm just going, I'm going to start my new job tomorrow. He's never seen an employee sued in that scenario. You're in much more control than you ever think you are. Miles more. Next stage, let's get your resignation letter right and send it to both your manager and the most senior HR person in the business and ensure it's delivered. Next, you're going to keep an audit trail of everything that is said and done to you during that process. You wouldn't believe the amount of constructive dismissal claims that somebody could make during this process. Companies do dismal things to people. So let's talk about that resignation letter a little bit later, and let's talk about anger. So the next thing is you might get into the anger phase of what's happened after you've resigned, and that can last anywhere from 5 minutes to a few weeks. And I often at third hand, and Michael often at third hand, and the team often at third hand, we witness appalling behaviour from companies at this stage. Companies become very pedantic about activities, times. Right, I want you in the office at 8 o'clock tomorrow. What are you doing? It's 5:54. Why aren't you at your desk? We've seen it all. Sometimes companies are very controlling. They give people menial jobs and tasks to work on during their notice period out of spite. I've seen that. Companies say, well, you'll never get a reference. Remember, references, they don't count anymore. You can't legally give a bad reference and you can't legally give a good reference. So the moment they start talking about that, that's rubbish for a start. But why? Why are they angry? Well, they're angry because they've been dumped like a jilted lover. They're angry because your departure, if you're any good, has probably cost them money at a personal level. They're angry because you've caused them a serious problem. You've caused them a big problem that wasn't there a day ago, that's added to their list of other problems. And the reality is, people ask questions when good people resign from jobs. You know, I once, as a manager, had a guy leave my team, and the MD drove over to Leeds. This is many years ago, when one of my first jobs in recruitment, and the MD sat me down in a meeting room and he went, "If that guy's leaving, who else is?" And I went, "What do you mean?" And he went, "If he's leaving, 2 or 3 more are leaving too." So they're angry because if they're smart, they know they've got an attrition problem. They know that if you're going, someone else is going to go too. You ain't the only one that's fed up, annoyed, miffed with the work. They're angry because somebody's going to be asking, is it the manager? Is this guy a bad leader? Is this guy creating an attrition in the sales team or in the commercial team that we don't know? They're angry because actually they might be having to face a fundamental truth that there's something wrong with the business at a fundamental level. That's going to make me angry. If I look at my own career, sometimes the points at which I'm often the most grumpy is because I realise it's due to my own failure, my own fault, my own screw up. Sometimes I don't like what I see in the mirror, and employers don't like what they see in the mirror. Nobody likes to look in the mirror and think, ooh, people are leaving me. People are leaving my team. People are leaving my environment, the environment that I lead. They don't want to work in. They think life is better elsewhere than working here for me. And that makes people angry, despondent. It's embarrassing. Resignation is a big statement. It says to your employers, I can't earn money here. It says, you aren't very good. It says, there's no future here for me. And it makes other employees question whether they should leave. It makes operational employees question if their own work is any good. It makes the project management team think, Christ, are we not implementing properly? It makes developers ask, is there something wrong with my software? Customers often worry. Oh, and that's before we figure into the fact that you're walking away from a decent sized pipeline that's going to cost the business a load of money. So damn right, they're going to be angry when you resign. They're going to look at it like it's a betrayal. They'll figure that you lied about where you were to get to interviews. They'll figure that whilst you've been in your car telling them that you were working, you were on the phone to a recruitment consultant talking about other jobs. They've been cheated on and they're hurt. And that anger is going to manifest itself. So here's what you've got to do. 1, before you resign, you have to prepare a really detailed handover document. This document should be better than any proposal or any piece of work you've ever done whilst in their employ. And doing so takes the sting out and makes it an operational rather than a human transaction. It presents the whole resignation as a fait accompli, which quickly then moves the whole process forward and out of anger into the next stage. So that when you resign, the moment you resign, they get all angry, say, listen, I know you're angry, I've prepared a very detailed handover document for you here. And it tends to take the sting out of the whole thing. Next, be calm and be a pro. To make sense of the betrayal, the next thing they're going to want to know, they're going to want to know where you're going. Where are you going? Who are you going to work for? Where are you going? Who are you going to work for? Tell me who, tell me who, tell me who, tell me who. And they're going to put you under an awful lot of pressure to tell them. Their not knowing where you're going is one of your primary leverage items and negotiation advantages. You do not legally have to tell them where you're going, and you should not. Do not tell them where you are going. Next stage, they'll go through bargaining. This is the bit where they come at you. They've got past the denial, they've got past the anger stage. This is the bit where they're going to try and turn you round. And denial and the anger, they prevent rational thought. But now that denial and anger have gone, they start thinking, how the hell do we get ourselves out of this problem? So bargaining is the point where counteroffers get made. It's the point where they come at you, and it's the point where people think and people get very flattered. Well, what's important to remember is actually the bargaining stage of the whole resignation process is actually all about control. It's about the employer realizing they've lost control of you as the employee. And I'll give you a fabulous example. Many years ago, I was the sales director of a software company. We had this deal on the go on the Isle of Man. It's about £500,000 worth. It was a fabulous deal. And as part of that deal, in order to win it, I had to throw in effectively the use of one of our developers, a lad called Steve, who was going to go out there and be on site with the client for about 4 months, effectively just tinkering with the back end to make it fit Manx legal accounting requirements. And we were going to do a bit of bespoke development because I thought, well, if we can do it with this one site, I'll clean up on the Isle of Man anyway. Day before I'm due to fly out with the contract, Steve walks in and says, I'm resigning. I've got a job as the head support developer for the timekeeping software for Formula One. He was bright, likeable, articulate, good-looking, charismatic kid. Not something you often see in a developer. I think, oh God, what am I going to do? I go downstairs and I sit down with the CEO and I say, what do I do? And he said, here's what we're going to do, Johnny. First things first, but take a big, deep breath. He said, if it cost you 50 grand's worth of the margin on that deal to make sure that the deal still happened, would you accept that right now? And I said, yeah, of course I would. He said, here's what you're going to do. One, I want you and Steve, this is another Steve, who's the ops director, to go upstairs and I want you to double the lad's basic salary. And I go, double it? Are you serious? And he goes, listen, just go upstairs and double it. And I go, that's just ridiculous. And he said, it's not. He said, it's not double his basic salary, Johnny. It's double the basic salary divided by 12 for as many months as it takes him to realise that it's still the same job he wanted to leave X many months ago. He said, the next thing I want you to do is to go to HR and hire 2 more developers. And I said, why? And he said, because he'll leave anyway. But we'll have ensured that we're in control at the point at which he decides it's the same job he was trying to leave a while ago. We went upstairs, we offered him double his basic salary. He, like an idiot, fell for the double basic salary counteroffer. He stayed about another 4 months and went to work for Formula One. Single lad, had the time of his life, and off he went. Oh, and I got my deal. Bargaining and the bargaining stage of resignation is all about control. It's about them avoiding loss of earnings. It's about them avoiding the fact that your pipeline might look half decent at the point at which you resign. And somebody sat there thinking, shit, who's going to close that pipeline? It's about making sure they don't lose reputation with the customers. Because when salespeople resign, it looks bad to customers. Customers worry. It's about maintaining reputation with the other team members. It's about being shown that they can put the finger in the dike. It's about proving that there isn't going to be an exodus of the other employees. If we can hang on to this one, the others will stay. The key thing to remember is when they start making you counteroffers, your market value, your value to the world at large hasn't increased by 40% in the last 3 days. It's a gesture, an attempt to control you. 2, if you stay and put yourself under horrific pressure anyway, because now you're the guy that they had to go out and bargain with to get you to stay. The fundamental shift in that relationship is immense. The moment they offer you a massive counteroffer, it's a little bit like turning around to a partner that's jilting you and saying, I'll buy you a diamond ring if you stay, or I'll buy you a new car if you stay. Every time you look at that car or that diamond ring, you think, Christ, I had to buy a diamond ring to get you to stay. And that erodes a relationship. So what tends to happen is people stay with a massive counteroffer, put themselves under horrific pressure, and end up leaving on their employers, not their own terms. Next bit is you accept a salary that's well above market rate in a counteroffer. Nearly all people that accept counteroffers walk into our office, they say, I want £90,000 basic salary, but they're only worth 65k base. And they end up in golden handcuffs. They get the big counteroffer, they go home, they say to their partners, hey, I'm going to stay where I am. They've just offered me a 40% pay rise. How could I turn it down? Then they go out and get a bigger house and a bigger car, send their kids to some private schools. They think, wow, this is gravy. I'm so important to my employees. They're never going to fire me. But then the point at which they try and leave, they're now living on some inflated basic salary above and beyond their market value, and they can't leave. Their employers have put golden handcuffs on them. Or worse still, because you're on that basic salary, you end up moving to roles that are bigger than your skill set because you're being paid above your skill level. And you end up in these awful downward career spirals. Money isn't the only other leverage tool that people will come at you with when you resign. They'll give you a new job title. They'll invent a new role. I saw one January of this year. Candidate's been 14 years with the same company. They just invented a job out of nowhere for the guy. Guess what? 6 months on, he's back registered in my candidate portfolio. Or they'll wheel out senior execs from across the company. I once had a situation where a senior executive landed his helicopter in the back garden of a candidate, knocked on the door and said, "What have we got to do to get you to stay?" That's powerful stuff, but that's all about reputation, ego, being in control, not losing 3, 4, 5 million pounds worth of deals. Ask yourself on the day they start going through that bargaining process when you've resigned, why did I have to resign to get what I finally wanted out of these guys? Next question to ask yourself on the day they start bargaining. Because they've bargained and made me this offer, is the job now fundamentally at an intrinsic deep level a better job than the job I had yesterday? Has it changed and shifted that much? Are they really recognising me now? Because if they withheld your career until you resigned, what else are they going to withhold? Next stage is they go through depression and then acceptance. They realise you ain't staying and they've lost control. And this is the point where they totally ignore you. I've seen this. I worked with a guy last summer, really good bloke, had been 12 years with the same company. He had been an instrumental part of that organisation's growth. Small business, turned over about 5 million. He'd made the guy who owned it rich. He made him rich. He put him in his Range Rover. Pretty much, not far off single-handedly. He resigned, and from the moment he realised he couldn't turn him round, through his 6-week notice period, he never spoke to him again. They will ignore you, they'll forget about you. Next thing to remember is that your leaving do, they'll have a final go. They'll organise a leaving do, get you drunk, beg you to stay. That's the bit where sometimes people are a little bit vulnerable. So let's talk about some practicalities. Remember, they're no longer your boss. You're in charge. Number 2, be very, very clear. The first thing is your formal letter of resignation to your manager and to HR in PDF format. It's not an email. You write a letter. You post it and email it, and whatever you do, don't rant. Often when people are leaving a job and they're pissed off and emotions have boiled up and they're really grumpy with how it was over the last few years, it all comes out in this vitriol in this offer letter. That's a really bad idea. It just gives people fuel to argue with and fight with and try and turn you around with. So let's just go through a sample letter here that I've got in front of us. It says here, "Dear Sir, dear Madam, I write to make you aware of my resignation from my position as X with Company Y. I have enjoyed my time with the company and I'm now ready to move on. I start with my new employers on date X. Due to the competitive nature of my new position, I would like to point out that I feel professionally compromised by having in my possession material of a customer-focused nature that belongs to the company, and have therefore prepared a detailed handover of all opportunities that I'm working with, and have already made appointments with my colleagues to discuss that with them at the earliest possible opportunity. I have also now packed up all of my equipment and enclosed it and sent it to the company's headquarters via courier. Once again, I would like to thank you for the opportunity of having been able to work with Company X, and I would like to wish you all the very best for the future. Many thanks, Candidate X." So let's look at this letter in a little bit more detail. First bit, it is my intention to start with my new employers on date X. You dictate the pace and you maintain the clarity of that communication. You don't ask them when you can leave. You tell them when you are leaving. You just dictate the pace. I will be leaving on that date. Next bit. Due to the competitive nature of my new position, I would like to point out that I feel professionally compromised by having in my possession material of a customer-focused nature that belongs to the company, and have therefore prepared detailed handover all opportunities that I'm currently working with. It's a veiled, subtle threat that says, I'm going to a competitor, therefore I have put myself on garden leave. Or you ought to do it pretty pronto. And so because I'm so professional, I have packed up my laptop, packed up my kit, because I don't intend to do the unprofessional thing of looking at all my data whilst I'm getting ready to go and work for a competitor. At which point they will put you on garden leave. It will get you out of there quicker. You'll be sat at home reading the papers and they'll be paying you for the privilege of doing it. And have already made appointments with my colleagues to discuss that with them at the earliest possible opportunity. Make it public and make it clear that it's already gone public. Then they can't start thinking about hiding the fallout, controlling you. Everybody already knows. You've already met with your colleague for a handover. So it's about getting ahead of the process, having your handover document in minute detail, and presenting the whole resignation. The guys that resign really effectively, they present it as a fait accompli, a done deal. Not open to negotiation, not open to discussion. Next bit. I have also now packed up all of my equipment and enclosed it and sent it to the company's headquarters via courier. And then you pack up your equipment and enclose it and send it to the company's headquarters via courier. They know you've resigned then. Worst case scenario, if you agree to do a little bit of work over the intervening period, they'll send it back. But it's very final. It says, we ain't negotiating, we ain't talking, we ain't fighting. So practicalities, write your letter, book your handover with your colleagues, go public, send the letter via email and post, call your manager and book an appointment, pack up your kit and take it to the meeting or courier it, and change your LinkedIn status immediately. Play golf, sit in the garden, chill out. So let's talk about notice periods. I have never seen a candidate sued over breach of contract for not working a full notice period. And as we said, we did this podcast recently, we had an employment lawyer on it. Feel free to listen to it or ring him and ask him for advice. It just doesn't happen. But I'm not your lawyer, and that doesn't constitute legal advice, obviously, as a disclaimer. Remember, your new employer is the priority, but equally, if you have to, a fair handover should get done in the right circumstances. You know, if you leave tomorrow and start with your new employers tomorrow, you aren't out of pocket. You'll get paid by your new employers. And okay, you might have to pay a little bit of emergency tax, but I have never, in 20 years in recruitment, witnessed somebody be truly busy for an entire 1 month notice period or 2 month notice period. It's a joke, it never happens. Handovers don't take more than a week. Yeah, okay, maybe they'll ask you to work a couple of deals on your way out, but the only basis upon which they'll ask you to work a couple of deals on your way out is if you've admitted to them that you're not going to a competitor and you've been weak earlier on in the process. If they think you're going to a competitor, if you allow them to think you're going to a competitor, if you refuse to tell them where you're going, they will get nervous and put you on garden leave. You will go home and you'll get to do your handover. References, they'll threaten you. Oh, we're going to give you a bad reference because you're leaving early. We're going to give you a bad reference because... The referencing system is legally a joke now. Again, look it up legally. People can't give you a bad reference and they can't give you a good reference. It's very difficult to give a negative reference. And 99 out of 100 references now in the current market, they come from HR. And the references usually say of, from, and to. So-and-so worked for us from date X to date Y as individual Z. That's all they usually say, because legally you can get sued for giving a bad reference and sued for giving a good one. Remember, resigning is all about the control of the event itself and about maintaining control of the process. And finally, I think the thing to really remember is when you're resigning, you're demonstrating to your new employer a bit about your negotiation skills. You're giving them a little taste. It's a little bit like the part of the deal when you're a software salesperson in between you having closed the deal and started implementing, and your operations team are starting to talk to their client. They're starting to assess, is this a good deal? Is it bad? Is this onboarding good or bad? You're onboarding your new employer now. They're not onboarding you, you're onboarding them. They're starting to learn about how you really roll during your resignation process. If you're flimsy and inefficient during your resignation process, they're going to start to already wonder, they're already thinking about you. Is this guy flimsy and inefficient when he's negotiating and closing a deal? It's part of the basis upon which you build your relationship with your new employer. The basis upon which they realise this is how this guy does what he does. So all the best, good luck, and if you need help, call us. Goodbye.